Welcome back, everyone, to the second day of our event. Good to see folks back. And for those of you who may be joining us today only, just want to reintroduce myself. Mon nom est Nathalie Laviadès-Jaudoin. Je suis vice-présidente principale à l'École de la fonction publique du Canada et je serai votre modératrice également aujourd'hui. We have another full agenda for you today, but first I want to take a moment to acknowledge and recognize some of our regional events. Comme vous le savez, la fonction publique est répartie au Canada et à l'étranger, et nous souhaitions permettre au plus grand nombre de personnes de se réunir comme on le fait aujourd'hui ici. Deputy heads and other senior officials are hosting events in every province and territory, bringing together local public servants from a range of departments and agencies. I'm going to be naming a few. In Atlantic Canada, we have Michael Vandergrift hosting Fredericton Public Servants at the Enarcan Forestry Centre. Ariane Reza and Laura Lee Langley are with public servants in Moncton. Harpreet Kochar and Christine McDowell are in Halifax. Paul Ledwell and Lawrence Hanson are in Charlottetown. And Annette Gibbons and Dave Boland are in St. John's. Nous avons également des événements dans les régions du Québec et de l'Ontario. Un grand merci à Isabelle Mondou et Jean-Frédéric Lafaille qui accueillent des fonctionnaires à Montréal pour une réflexion sur les valeurs et l'éthique. Kaylee Lévesque et Jean-François Fortin qui animent une discussion informelle avec des collègues à Québec. And Arun Tangaraj and Nancy Gardner, who are each hosting events in Toronto. In the north, welcome to public servants in Iqaluit, who are gathered with Canor President Jimmy Onalik and other federal executives. Beyond these whole-of-government regional events, individual departments are also showcasing what values and ethics mean in their own specific contexts. We have Anne Kelly hosting Correctional Services Canada employees today at Beaver Creek Institution in Gravenhurst. Natasha Kim and Major General Paul Prévost are hosting employees at Canadian Forces Base Kingston. Bob Hamilton is in Sudbury with CRA employees. Sandra McCardle is in Washington today with federal public servants there. And Christopher McClellan and Rob Stewart are hosting events at other missions abroad later in the month. So this is just a sample. There are many other events taking place within and across teams throughout the public service. And it's really great to see that we're reaching public servants where they are. Envoyez-nous une photo de vous ou de votre équipe avec laquelle vous regardez la web diffusion et indiquez-nous d'où vous participez à l'événement sur les valeurs et l'éthique. Go to wooclap.com and enter the code VEPhoto or scan the QR code to share your photo and your location. Le mur de photos va être exposé lors de l'événement en personne ici à Ottawa, inclus dans le webcast de l'événement et pourra être partagé sur les médias sociaux. So with that, we're going to continue with the day. Hier, nous avons entendu nos leaders parler de leur parcours et des leçons qu'ils et elles ont tirées en lien avec les valeurs et l'éthique, ainsi que l'appel à l'action en faveur de la lutte contre le racisme, de l'équité et de l'inclusion. We heard from some powerful speakers who have shown not only how to raise the bar that we set for ourselves on anti-racism, on reconciliation, on inclusion of persons with disabilities, but also on how to hold ourselves accountable for living up to those standards. Public servants on the front lines shared valuable insights into how they apply values and ethics in their operational contexts across the country and beyond. We also heard about the critical role of building trust and respect, not only with the public, but also within our organizations and our teams as a foundation for driving progress on the call to action and advancing equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion within the public service. Today, we're going to continue with those conversations by examining how our values and ethics help us, public servants, navigate the challenges and opportunities in our evolving landscape. One rapidly evolving area is artificial intelligence. AI is highly relevant to public service because of its impact on service excellence and resource stewardship. We'll delve deeper into how AI is shaping our work, the opportunities that it presents, but also the responsibilities that come with its use. Mais avant de passer au prochain segment, on va jeter un coup d'œil à une autre vidéo de notre série mettant de l'avant la façon dont les fonctionnaires donnent vie à leurs valeurs. Cette vidéo est axée sur le respect de la démocratie et l'intégrité.
Respect for democracy means, upholding the principles of our parliamentary system, respecting its democratic process, and then being nonpartisan. But to me, it's also meant upholding the honor of the crown. And it's also meant for me working inside the system to ensure that Indigenous voices are heard.
I mean, democracy is under threat, and seeing that it's something that needs to be protected, and it's really the responsibility of every Canadian, but even more so those that actually serve in the public service. So certainly something that's very much of interest to me.
Every day I'm contemplating ethical questions like, are we going too far politically, that we're allowing people to participate fully in democracy? So as long as you just do what you're supposed to do in those situations, that's how you make it better for everybody.
Pour moi, deux mots-clés, c'est garder la confiance de l'employeur, mais aussi garder la confiance du public, parce que pour nous, on est payé par les contribuables. Puis pour moi, c'est quelque chose qui est très, très important.
It's really up to us as public servants to be clear on our role, to always think about what is in the public interest, what is going to help us maintain the integrity of our regulatory regimes.
And there's no easy answers, never has been. So at the very least you could do is, when in doubt, ask.
This video is yet another reminder that our values and ethics code guides everything we do. But values aren't just words on paper. They come to life through our actions and the examples we set. Before I introduce our first guest, let's take a quick survey to help set the stage for the themes we'll be discussing shortly. Please go to wooclap.com and enter the code VEOCT in the top banner to access the survey and answer our question. What is one word that describes what it means to you to be a public servant? Quel est le mot qui décrit ce que signifie pour vous le fait d'être une ou un fonctionnaire? We'll take a moment and look at what's coming through. Pride, responsible, duty, support, serving Canadians, responsibility, services, excellence, support, integrity, service coming through loud and clear, integrity. Excellent. Let's keep those coming. Accessibility, representation, leadership, building Canada. Thank you. Thank you for your participation. En réfléchissant à ce que représente pour nous le fait d'être fonctionnaire, nous réfléchissons fondamentalement à la façon dont nous incarnons nos valeurs au travail, mais également au rôle unique que nous occupons dans l'atteinte de l'objectif commun de la fonction publique. Hier, nous avons abordé ce sujet que nous allons approfondir aujourd'hui lors de discussions avec les conférenciers et les conférencières. I would now like to welcome our first speaker, Professor Ian Stedman, who joins the Canada School of Public Service as a visiting scholar through the Jocelyne Bourgon Visiting Scholar Initiative that was launched in 2021. As an associate professor of Canadian Public Law and Governance and the graduate program director in the School of Public Policy Administration at York University, Professor Stedman is a leading expert in public sector ethics and accountability. Prior to joining York University, Professor Stedman held the inaugural Research Fellowship in Artificial Intelligence Law and Ethics at Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children, and then a postdoctoral fellowship at York University, where he researched the governance of artificial intelligence in healthcare. In his role as a visiting scholar, Professor Stedman will support the school in advancing activities related to public service values and ethics. This will include participating in school events and other learning initiatives in partnership with departments across the public service. We are really fortunate to have the benefit of Professor Stedman's extensive experience as a professor, an advisor in the Office of the Integrity Commissioner of Ontario, and a researcher focused on the challenges and opportunities of our digital world. Please join me in welcoming Professor Stedman.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Natalie. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to take in all these wonderful discussions and to reflect on what we've heard so far. As an outsider, I can say that, right? I have to say it's really quite inspiring to see the depth of engagement that we've seen yesterday, and I'm sure we'll see more today. I've been given 5 minutes, so I better not belabor this. I'd like to take that time to tell you a little bit about myself, why I'm here, what I hope we can accomplish together. So as you heard, I started my career as a lawyer north of Toronto, and then I quickly moved into a role at the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, working for the Office of the Integrity Commissioner. My job there was primarily to give advice to the elected MPPs, but also to help out with lobbying registration administration and then advice to public servants under the Ontario Public Service Act. When I was at that office, though, one of the things that I realized that stuck out to me was that almost nobody really understood the rules. Like, some of them, in particular the gift rule, a little bit too complex. And almost everyone who came into the office, like, it was a nightmare to try to explain these things. Politicians barely understood what the rules were. The public absolutely didn't understand what the rules were. And as a person in that office picking up the newspaper, we had physical newspapers back then, right? It's not all digital. I would see that even journalists didn't have anyone who could help them really make those things accessible. And so from the inside, pulling my hair out, looking outside, thinking, why is this stuff so hard? Why does no one get it? It really struck me, right? It was never my intention to become an academic, but I just didn't see too many people actively engaging with these topics in a critical and thoughtful way outside of government. And I truly think that we need that. Right? We need that very much. We need people on the outside looking in, asking questions. We need people pointing fingers and saying, why aren't you doing this or that? That's what makes a healthy democracy. But more importantly, I think that's what can help drive innovation and progress. People who aren't on the inside looking at what's happening and asking questions. Academia and academics sometimes suffer from the criticism that we stand on the outside looking in and pointing fingers, and that we really don't know what it means to be a politician or a public servant on the ground having to make real decisions about complex issues under incredible pressure. That's not an unfair criticism most of the time. But academics are also the ones who often take the time to look at what is being done and to ask whether it meets the standards that have been set, and to talk to people and to try to understand the why. Then they can help suggest solutions and maybe even do it in a way that puts pressure on those who have the power to make things happen. Now, I don't mean to suggest by my remarks today that I think there's something broken, far from it. But the Deputy Minister's report to the clerk drew our attention to the fact that public servants are being confronted with new challenges that they don't think are reflected in the Code of Values and Ethics. And some of you also noted that you don't think the code helps you navigate those issues when you confront them. For example, we heard yesterday about the idea that aspects of a person's identity can become the subject of politics, and that living through this can make it very difficult, if not impossible, to reconcile your humanity against your duty to uphold public service values. And I can also tell you that I hear over and over again that remote work and virtual work make it hard, or at least a little bit harder, to build a culture around values and ethics in the same way as has been done before and in the past. Something has changed, right? There's less water cooler chit-chat where you can have these little conversations about the minutia of what it means to do your job on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sure you've all heard this too. But let me say something real quick about artificial intelligence as well. I know we're going to talk about it today. You heard it's a part of my background and what I do. It isn't just a public sector challenge, right? We all need real leadership helping us understand when and how to use these tools. Not only because they're complicated and under-regulated, there's the academic in me, but because they need data. And as I'm sure we'll talk about today, our data can be dirty. Dirty because we've only just started to have conversations and to speak openly and actively about who has the power when it comes to AI and how they exercise it, but also about whose voices have been included and excluded when we make policy. Policy data being reused to glean new insights, right? That data could be filled with bias. So to try to gain new insights from that potentially biased data that we haven't really interrogated, it may feel challenging for a public servant to do that and say, how am I still acting in the public interest? How is what I'm doing having and showing respect for democracy? How are we going to reconcile what AI is and what we don't know about it with those values that we've been talking so much about? These are real problems. These are real questions that we need to grapple with in order to make our public service one that is welcoming of diversity of voices and experiences, and one that is welcoming of a diversity of ways of knowing and doing. We need to grapple with these challenges so that we can build the public service we want as we move forward into this complex, virtual, and I would dare to say oftentimes impersonal world that the authors of the code may not have imagined was forthcoming. I don't have enough time to dig into it today, but you should know that these conversations are also being had in other jurisdictions all around the world. Things have changed, and we all need to make sense of what that means. It's not just a matter of navigating the day-to-day either. At the international level, organizations like the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, have also been having these conversations for years. They've been writing for years about the important role that public sector ethics and values plays in good governance overall. So we're doing the right thing by having this conversation and asking these questions. Let me end by saying this. I'm just a visiting scholar, right? But like Danielle said yesterday, I'm here at a time when you, the public service, are having a conversation about things that we rarely talk openly about. And I think we're having this conversation at the right time. The Canada School of Public Service thinks so too, because they've given me this opportunity. And I want you to know that I, like each of you, care about this conversation. I want to learn what matters to you, what works and what doesn't work. I want to hear the whys, and I want to think through the whats and the hows. We all, each of us, wants to do good work, and we all want to leave this place better than we found it. So please, I would say to you, feel free to connect with me, to reach out to me, to send me an email. Send me an anonymous email if you want. Start a Twitter account. It doesn't make any sense. And send me an anonymous Twitter message. I don't care what it is. Reach out to me. Tell me the things that you think I should hear so that I can spend my time here doing meaningful work that can help push the envelope a bit, please. And with that, it now gives me great pleasure to introduce the man who needs no introduction, because he's the reason we've had this opportunity to come together. He has an incredibly impressive career in the public service, working in more roles than I can wrap my head around as a lowly academic, worked in human rights, in trade and foreign affairs, as an assistant secretary to the cabinet, as a deputy minister in different portfolios, and even as an ambassador to Norway. He's seen the public service through many different lenses and at many different levels. And he stands here, I think, from my days with you, steadfast and committed to seeing that this public service continues to evolve. So his remarks today will help us focus on what it means to be a public servant, so we can continue to sharpen our understanding of our engagement with our values as we continue to learn how to operationalize them amongst all the challenges that we're facing. So with that, I cede the floor to Clerk Hannaford, and thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Ian. I think that set the tone for today very nicely, and for the work that we have been doing and will continue to do over the course of the next period of time. This is the second day, obviously, of a symposium that I think has been really quite inspiring to me. There has been a depth to this conversation which is, I think, reflective of an appetite for us to grapple with some of the core issues that we are confronting as a community and some of the things that define us as a profession. And that, in and of itself, I think, is, as I say, it is inspiring to me personally. It's inspiring of the vibrancy of this group. It's inspiring in the sense that I think we are grappling with things that matter. And that's to the strength of us as an institution and the future of this body. I want to start by saying, though, that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And the importance of statements like this link us back to the discussions we've been having. Values and ethics are rooted in the respect for people. And respect for people is rooted in the work that we are doing towards reconciliation. So wherever you are today, whether it's in the National Capital Region or across Canada or abroad, I encourage you to learn the history of the area you find yourselves and to learn from the Indigenous peoples. As has been evident from the conversations we've been having, we learn enormously from those around us. About a year ago, we launched this dialogue on values and ethics, et j'ai été frappé par l'impression avec lequel les fonctionnaires ont entamé ce dialogue. J'ai bien aimé discuter avec les fonctionnaires à tous les niveaux et obtenir une nouvelle perspective sur ce que nous faisons au nom des Canadiens. Many of the conversations have really centered around the theme of what it is to be a public servant. You're all going to have different answers to that question based on your own experiences, the job you do, the institution you serve, and the way that you serve Canadians. For my own part, the service of democracy is one of the most inspiring aspects of the work that we perform together. We are a central pillar of our democratic system, and the democratic system is a central pillar of our society. So we make a very direct contribution to something that is really fundamental to the society that we serve. And I want every public servant across our organization to feel proud, not just of their individual achievements or the achievements of their team or department, but in being a public servant. And I must say, I found it enormously gratifying to watch the words flash up on the screen earlier. Service should be enormously prominent, as should be pride. And I hope this conversation reinforces that pride in who we are. Notre travail est essentiel pour notre démocratie, et il l'est aussi pour notre pays et pour les Canadiens. Nous défendons l'intégrité et la crédibilité du système, et nous respectons la volonté démocratique des Canadiens. C'est un rôle à jouer de plus important. Each of us is part of something bigger. For me, that realization crystallized very early on in my career. As a newly minted lawyer, I was given an opportunity in 1995 to play a role in a dispute that we were having with Spain on our East Coast fisheries. And that dispute found its way in front of the International Court of Justice, and I was part of a small team that was asked to present our defense in that context. And I realized, as I was working on our presentation of Canada's case, that this really wasn't about me. It was about Canada. The consequences that we would have as a result of our success or failure would be felt by our country. It would relate to our waters and our relationship with an ally. Work I was doing really wasn't about me. It was about our country. And that same feeling has followed me throughout my career. As I was given the responsibility of being a deputy minister and leading an institution of public servants who impressed me daily with the quality of the work they did and their commitment and the depth of their expertise. It's followed me when I've had the opportunity to travel with prime ministers to areas near conflict zones where you see our people in uniform who serve and sacrifice for the ideals that our country holds dear. Nous faisons tous partie de quelque chose de plus grand. Lorsqu'un Canadien demande de l'aide pour remplir sa déclaration de revenus, s'il s'inscrit à des programmes en ligne ou qu'il passe la douane, l'expérience qu'il vit façonne sa perception de la fonction publique et du gouvernement. Le fonctionnaire qui travaille dans un centre d'appel, qui écrit des contenus web, qui examine des demandes ou qui définit des conditions d'admissibilité à un programme, fait partie de quelque chose de plus grand. Et les travailleurs en contact avec le public ne sont pas les seuls concernés. Toutes les personnes qui travaillent dans l'ombre pour épauler nos institutions, je pense entre autres aux ressources humaines, à l'administration, à la technologie de l'information, participent de notre réussite. When public servants at every level deliver excellence and demonstrate integrity and exercise sound stewardship of the taxpayer dollars, that builds trust and confidence. It's not just what we do, it's how we do it. And as we face an operating environment that's ever-changing and increasingly complex, these conversations about how we do our work, how we embrace our core values, how we adapt to continue to deliver excellence in the future are essential. So, how should we proceed? Well, guided by shared purpose with a strong understanding of who we are as an organization. And that's what our Code of Values and Ethics provides. A professional, nonpartisan public service is an essential part of our democracy. We provide the government with options and then put the government's decisions into practice in the service of Canada. Our advice is based on science, evidence, knowledge, and experience. We are honest and forthright about challenges and provide solid options to address them. Ultimately, it's up to ministers to make decisions on behalf of our country. And whatever our personal beliefs, we have a professional duty to support our democracy by serving our clients, the government, and Canadians to the best of our ability. We do this with courage, with candor, with transparency and openness, and with respect. I talked about respect earlier, how it is a big part of reconciliation, learning and listening to Indigenous peoples, respecting their knowledge, their stories, their identities, and their experiences. As we discussed yesterday afternoon, we also bring our values to life by making meaningful progress on the call to action on anti-racism, equity, and inclusion, and by making our workplaces accessible to all, by promoting a healthy culture. Our ability to innovate and solve problems comes from teamwork, which happens when people feel valued and included. Nous devons avoir des conversations franches sur la santé mentale, les espaces de travail sûrs, et aussi rechercher les points de vue divergents, y réfléchir et communiquer les décisions prises et le pourquoi. Nous devons également faire preuve d'agilité et de résilience face au changement. La réalité de notre travail et du monde dans lequel nous vivons est que le changement est constant. Que ce changement soit aussi mondial qu'une pandémie, aussi local qu'un changement de priorité. Il faut l'accepter et se donner les moyens de réussir. Il y a bien de choses auxquelles nous pouvons nous préparer. Nous pouvons analyser les tendances et prévoir différents scénarios dans 1 an ou dans 5 ans. We need to be comfortable with the unknown unknowns. There will always be surprises, and it's up to us to respond effectively. We've seen extraordinary examples of this, including our responses during the COVID pandemic and to the wildfires across the country. To manage risks, adapt to new circumstances, and make the most of opportunities to innovate. Now, we know that there is a fixed election date in October of 2025, and as a professional and nonpartisan public service, we support democracy and carry out the business of government. For those of you who have joined the public service in recent years, you will not have had the experience of our role during the electoral period, and I strongly encourage leaders across our system to discuss that role during the election time. And I encourage us all to embrace our role. The public service offers continuity for Canadians and for the duly elected government. It is the strength of our system. Now, in all we do, we must strive for excellence. And achieving excellence is no easy feat. We are, after all, only human. Sometimes we can feel like we're hitting roadblocks, and it can be hard if our advice doesn't make it to the final cut. But take this to heart. Our service matters. Our work matters. At every level and in every part of the country. Ultimately, I hope you come to see yourselves as I see you. Part of an essential whole, contributing to an organization that has great meaning and profound purpose. Une organisation dont les principes fondamentaux ont résisté à la preuve du temps. Une organisation qui continuera d'évoluer pour répondre aux besoins des Canadiens d'aujourd'hui et de demain. C'est pourquoi cette conférence a autant d'importance. C'est pourquoi il importe de poursuivre le dialogue après la conférence. Nous voulons que les fonctionnaires sortent de cette conférence mieux outillés pour relever les défis de l'avenir. Now, as we look at what comes next, I think there's some key areas we can provide new direction that'll make a real difference. This afternoon's panel is going to be a discussion on guidelines for how we responsibly use artificial intelligence in our work. It's also been very clear over the course of the conversations we've had in the last year that guidance with respect to the use of social media would be welcome and important. Yesterday, we heard of the work that TBS has initiated in this regard, and I'm grateful for that because I think it provides a really sound foundation. But it also requires further development and discussion given the evolution of social media on a minute-by-minute basis. So I've asked Deputy Clerk Fox to continue these efforts, working closely with Jackie Bogdan, the Chief Human Resources Officer, to continue this dialogue and to refine the social media guidance by the spring of next year in a way that will reflect national and international best practices. Similarly, we don't want to lose the accomplishments we've had to date on our conversations on values and ethics, and I've asked Taiki Sarantakis, president of the school, to establish a permanent values and ethics visiting scholar, which will be operational by 2025. And it'll be named after my friend and former mentor, Ian Shugart, who was an inspirational colleague and mentor, former clerk of the Privy Council and senator, who loved this country. He epitomized what we aspire to as public servants, committed to excellence in serving the public and supporting democracy with integrity, openness, and respect. Taiki will provide some further details on this, but broadly speaking, the new role will be an annual rotating appointment with the scholar focusing on the development and implementation of values and ethics courses, research on ethics and governance, promoting the importance of ethical leadership, and ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion are fully integrated in our values of excellence, integrity, stewardship, respect for democracy, and respect for people. Enfin, j'invite les sous-ministres à poursuivre l'élan que nous avons pris, en concentrant les efforts au sein de leur organisation sur les points suivants. Mettre à jour le code de conduite organisationnelle, préparer un rapport ministériel de divulgation d'actes répréhensibles et de mauvaise conduite, demander aux employés de soumettre chaque année des attestations en matière de conflit d'intérêts et intégrer la responsabilité conséquente des progrès réalisés dans la mise en œuvre de l'appel à l'action. We are together the public service. We are the public service at this moment in time in the history of our country, all of us. We have a responsibility in that regard to live up to the values of our organization. We have a responsibility to our society to serve to the best of our ability. And we have a responsibility to hold ourselves to high standards. It's a very high calling. It's a critical role that we play. I'm deeply proud of this institution, and I really look forward to continuing this conversation in this format and going forward. And I look forward to the panel we're going to have right now. And I want to thank you all for participating in today's event. Thank you, Miigwech. Merci.
Thank you very much, Clerk Hannaford, for taking the time for being with us here today and sharing your thoughtful insights. So as you take a seat, just letting everyone know we are going to get ready for our next panel discussion. which Clerk Hannaford will be moderating. So with that, I'm going to be inviting our panelists to come join us on the stage, starting with Mélissa Dorion, who's a manager at Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada, as well as Nathalie Morin, Director General at Environment and Climate Change Canada. And I would also like to invite participants who are joining us virtually, starting with Aisha Zafar, who's an Assistant Deputy Minister at Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, as well as Raoul Entwali, an Issues Manager at Canada Revenue Agency. Just a reminder for everyone to go to wooclap.com and enter the code VEOCT in order to submit your questions. And with that, Clerk Hannaford, the stage is yours.
Excellent. Well, look, it's a pleasure to get a chance to chat with all of you. And my hope in this session is really we can have a bit of an exchange. This is an opportunity to hear from your experiences, hear from your perspectives, and to share with everyone who's participating, all 15,000 of you, the insights that you've gained from the perspectives that you have. And it was mentioned yesterday that we all come at the role of the public service from our very specific perspectives. I want to hear about that, but I also want to hear about some of the sort of transcending experiences you've had. In other words, how you see yourself contributing to the broader whole, how you see values playing into that. And maybe Raoul is a little unfair, but I maybe we'll start with you. I think you're the newest of the public servants on this panel, so I'm kind of interested in your experience to date, how you view the conversation we've had about about values and ethics, and your reflections on the way forward.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci beaucoup de m'accueillir. J'aurais vraiment aimé être avec vous aujourd'hui, mais je suis très reconnaissant de pouvoir tout de même vous joindre virtuellement et participer à cette conversation. Clerk Hannaford, I want to thank you too for bringing back this important discussion on values and ethics and for advancing the call to action on anti-racism, equity and inclusion across Canada. Vraiment, le travail que vous avez fait depuis que vous êtes entré en fonction a été une source d'inspiration et je tenais à vous féliciter. Also, a big thank you to the teams of the Privy Council Office and the Canada School of Public Service for putting this symposium together. Special shout out to Martin, to Catherine, Danica, Amen. Il y a beaucoup de personnes behind the scenes who've been working very hard to make sure that today can happen. So, un grand merci à vous tous. And so, yes, thank you for the question, Clerk Hannaford. Maybe I'll start with a little bit of background. So yes, I started my journey in the public service at the Canada Revenue Agency in 2019. I have to say my onboarding experience was very different from what many younger public servants went through during the pandemic. I had the privilege of working closely with my colleagues every day, and we worked in person. I shadowed them, I bombarded them with a bunch of questions, those poor guys. And they were incredibly patient and understanding with me, and they were very supportive. They practically held my hand until I felt confident enough to take on my own responsibilities independently. And this kind of in-person experience really helped me understand the core values that guide us in the public service. Values like respect for democracy, values for respect for people, integrity, and excellence. It really shaped my understanding of what it means to be a public servant and how we serve Canadians with accountability and respect. And for those who were onboarded during the pandemic, the experience was understandably very different. They didn't have the same in-person support, but they were part of something new and something important. These younger public servants were pioneers in virtual onboarding, and through their feedback and adaptability, they helped us improve this process. I remember when I moved into my second role at the CRA during the pandemic, my entire onboarding was done virtually. My mentor and I would spend long hours, sometimes entire days, on MS Teams, on calls, working through files one at a time. And it wasn't the same as being in person, but it showed me that with the right support, values like stewardship and excellence can still be upheld, even in a virtual environment. And this transition has also opened up opportunities to bring in amazing talent from across the country, not just locally. So I think we need to embrace this new reality and keep improving, ensuring that no matter where someone is located, they can feel connected to our shared commitment and values and ethics. And for younger public servants, I have to say, I think values and ethics are central to how we see our roles in the public service. Younger public servants really care deeply about fairness and equity, and they want to see respect for people in every aspect of their work. They expect integrity, not just in the tasks they perform, but in the leadership and the decision making around them. And that's why it's so important to keep talking about these values, not just as ideals, but as practical, everyday actions. Vous avez parlé des ressources qui ont été partagées par TBS hier. La dirigeante principale des ressources humaines euh, nous a parlé de ressources qui ont été créées pour nous, et c'est un excellent moyen d'entretenir ces conversations. Je pense que ces ressources fournissent des outils pratiques qui permettent de faire le lien entre les valeurs clés et notre travail quotidien, que nous soyons au bureau ou que nous travaillons à distance. And one of the best ways, we can help younger public servants understand what it means to be a public servant is by involving them in this conversation, like I am here today participating in this conversation. You know, I've had the great privilege of serving one of the largest employee networks in the public service, the CRA-YPN, which is a professional growth network. I am also an active member of the Federal Youth Network. And these are all examples of spaces that were designed to give younger employees a platform to share their ideas. Their voices help shape how we apply values like respect for people and integrity in today's evolving workplace. And when young public servants are actively involved in these discussions, they feel a stronger connection to the values that guide our public service. And similar to you, Clerk Hannaford, when you were a young lawyer participating in that dispute, you felt a stronger connection to the values and you realized that you're part of something bigger. Et quand je parle de cette approche, ce n'est pas quelque chose de théorique, nous l'avons observé dans la pratique. Par exemple, les nouvelles lignes directrices sur les médias sociaux qui ont été élaborées avec la participation de fonctionnaires de tout ministère et de tout niveau autour du Canada. Et ceci est un témoignage de la valeur de l'intégrité par la transparence et l'inclusivité. Et ce type de collaboration montre que lorsque nous travaillons ensemble, nous pouvons créer des politiques qui représentent un grand nombre d'expériences et de besoins. Et cela nous rappelle que le respect de la démocratie et le respect des personnes vont en pair avec la nécessité de veiller à ce que chaque voix soit entendue. So in the end, values and ethics come to life through the stories we share. At the CRA-YPN, we have something called Success Through Failure, which is a series of events where we open a platform for people to talk about their failures. We encourage them to talk openly about their experiences, both their successes, their failures, but especially those failures and challenges because they break down barriers and they remind us that we're all constantly learning and we're all humans. And by sharing these stories, we make values like integrity, like stewardship, personal and practical, not just something that is written in a code, but something that we live every day. So I guess my message today is to keep the conversation going, to keep learning from one another, and to ensure that values, respect for democracy, respect for people, integrity, stewardship, and excellence continue to guide us as we serve Canadians. Donc, je vais arrêter ici et je vous redonne la parole, Monsieur Hannaford.
Those were great points, Raoul. And I must say, one of the reasons why I thought it was important for us to initiate this conversation était une expérience personnelle. J'ai une fille qui a commencé sa carrière pendant la pandémie et c'était une expérience pas parfaite. And honnêtement, she started working for a big organization. It was not the public service, but you know, she'd moved to Toronto. She started her career sort of working at her kitchen table in a very small apartment. And her experience, as I kind of talked through it with her, was so different from mine when I started 30 years ago, where I had the opportunity, as you did, Raoul, to be chatting with people who were much more experienced. And sometimes finding that what I was watching, I didn't think was actually great practice. But in many instances, just by kind of imbibing what was going on around me, I had that opportunity to kind of take in the rules of the organization and the culture of the organization. And I have felt that through the pandemic, we lost the edge on that, some of that. And I thought it was really important for us to invigorate this conversation, in part because about a substantial number of people have joined since that period, and that was their initiation to this profession. Et peut-être on peut tourner à ma droite pour vos impressions, vos expériences. We'll start with you.
Well, as a manager in the public service, we're often sort of squished between two layers of implementing direction and providing fearless advice up the chain of command. But there's a lot that managers can do to empower and equip employees within their teams to really feel like they're living the values and ethics in their everyday lives. And it's funny, before coming here, I did reach out to colleagues in other departments and in different lines of work and ask them what they felt about the values and ethics as a practice in their everyday. And for the most part, people really saw the respect for people coming out in their work and in their day-to-day. And I think in no small part because of the hard work that's been done across the public service when it comes to mental health and well-being, the 13 psychological factors for a healthy workplace, but also the work on the call to action and EDI and accessibility. But it was clear that people had a harder time identifying the piece around democracy, the value and ethic around democracy in their day-to-day work. And I think when the conversation shifts a little from the word democracy and maybe using the old adage that many of us are familiar with fearless advice, loyal implementation, it resonated a little more. And I think that's what managers can bring back into their teams, is bringing these conversations and inviting conversation around how do you provide fearless advice? How do you loyally implement? And for those who are in the position for decision making, how do you make unbiased decisions? And it can be small things. So in your team meetings, we're very good at saying what are the barriers for moving forward a particular project or designing something. But there's a different set of questions we can add in there. And it's those questions around, is there something that happened throughout the week for which you felt conflicted or for which you felt uncertainty? And oftentimes when it's framed that way, people will start sharing information. And those are those moments where the values and ethics really need to be leaned into. And we can use different language, but really it comes back to the values and ethics around providing fearless advice and loyal implementation. And what will happen is if you as a manager can foster within your team a curiosity and a comfort with challenging each other, you will start building courage within your team members. So we hear this a lot. I'm very fortunate to be a chair of the ISED managers community, and we poll our members, and on a regular basis, what's come out over the years is we need to strengthen our sense of courage. And when we unpack that a little more through conversations, what we're hearing is that individuals aren't always sure how to package information and how to send it up in a way where they really are providing fulsome information and where they are checking themselves so that they're not tailoring it just to get buy-in. They're not tailoring it just because they know that it's something someone wants to hear. And it takes courage to do that because people worry, oh, well, if it's not what someone wants to hear, is this going to reflect badly on me? Will this affect my PMA? But if you can create an environment within your team where you encourage members to challenge each other in professional ways, and a challenge doesn't mean confrontation, just voice different opinions, bring different opinions to the table, and encourage them to challenge you as a manager. Make it safe, make it build that confidence and that reflex in your employees. That way, as they move up the chain, they're also going to exhibit that courage. And they can model it. They can see you modeling it. Now, the second piece to this, the loyal implementation, oftentimes when you go back to ask that question to your teammates, again, what is it that maybe made you feel a sense of conflicted or uncertain? The other part that often comes out is, well, my personal opinion or my personal preference isn't really well aligned with what I'm being asked to implement. And that's a real feeling, and that's something we can't ignore. And particularly in this day and age where our opinions are something so tied with our identity and that are so out there and encouraged to be out there in social media. And it's something that people are rewarded for with instant likes, share your opinion, instant like, but then you come to work and you're asked to park it. Park your personal opinion, park your personal preference, but that's critical for our work. But it does require managers to then lean into their employees and help them be okay with that because it's not an instinct that people come with. And it requires letting people be humbled in their opinion and holding back their opinion at certain moments in time, but with the recognition that the decision that's been made, it may not benefit you personally, but it's at someone's benefit within Canada. The people within Canada need that decision right now. And most public servants, I think, would very happily, loyally implement when they know that. I think where it becomes a bit tricky is that idea of loyal implementation requires trust in the process. So we've talked about the people of Canada trusting the public service, but there's also a notion of public servants trusting the process, the internal process. And this is where there's like a feedback loop that starts to build, because if an employee, for example, doesn't have the courage to provide fulsome recommendations, design in their program, design in the service, if they feel that maybe their own internal bias has been built into a process, into a recommendation, then it becomes harder to trust the process, because you think, well, maybe someone else has too. Maybe the decision makers haven't been provided with unbiased information on which to make their decision. And so, again, it comes back to fostering courage within your teams, courage within individual employees, to bring in a diversity of views, to challenge each other on, have we examined this from every possible angle, so that the advice you're sending up, the programs you're delivering, really have been well thought out, are reflective of everyone's needs. Decision makers are given the information they need to make unbiased decisions. And at that point, you can go with the flow and realize that what you're implementing, it will meet someone's need, and you can be proud of what you're accomplishing. And that word pride, so it did come up in the word cloud, and that's something that's extremely important, and something that perhaps we don't lean into enough as managers, or we do it in very isolated ways. So we're so busy maybe fostering a sense of pride in the work that a team is doing. But then the sense of loyalty is to that team, and not necessarily to the organization or to the public service. And wow, we have a lot to be proud of as a public service. We're amazing. The Canadian public service is always at the top when you look at global indexes of public service, and it has been for years. But we've also heard a lot of bad news about ourselves over the last number of years, and it's something that managers can lean into, is to foster a sense of pride in our team members, and be conscientious of not just building that loyalty to the team, because we've all been there at some point in time in your career. A recommendation is going to not gain favor, or your program or your initiative is going to change. And if your sense of identity and pride is strictly to that of your team and to your work, it makes you vulnerable, and it makes this idea of democracy vulnerable, because you're not as supportive of implementing the decision, because you feel disheartened. But if you really feel like you're part of a bigger picture, a public service, and have pride in being a member of the public service, not just your team, it's easier to accept the decision and support the decision, because you're proud of your colleagues and you're proud of the work that's being done. And so there's a lot that managers can do. And as far as what can organizations do for managers, that's a lot of pressure on managers. That's a lot of responsibility. And one thing we hear repeatedly is, we want to learn and we want to network. And by network, I don't mean like climb the ladder and shake hands. I mean, have connections with peers with whom you can talk through these complex situations. But managers often feel they don't have a lot of time to do that, or they feel the pressure to deliver. But if we can create some space for them and really model and emphasize the need for folks to take the time out to learn, to take the time out to connect with each other, in order to have a network behind the scenes that you can rely on to talk through these notions, that is one of the best things that we can do for managers. And I could probably go on for days, but perhaps I'll wrap it up with that statement. And for the decision makers, again, to help build that trust, communicate how decisions are made. Employees don't have the benefit of having been exposed to what information you were considering. They have to trust in the process. But and oftentimes decisions are filtered through many layers before they get to an employee, and it's not always obvious how a decision how the values were reflected in a decision. And so whether you're a manager within a team making a decision, an executive within an organization, a deputy minister, a governance table, or a central agency, when you're communicating the decisions, be conscious of the fact that an average employee needs to be able to see the values reflected in that decision. And when they can see that, the loyal implementation piece becomes all that much easier.
Those are great points. Thank you very much. Full perspective de part scientifique, si on peut dire ça.
Pour le côté scientifique, je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de points qui rejoignent les gestionnaires. Je pense que c'est vraiment important de comprendre que le contexte évolue beaucoup rapidement. Les scientifiques sont encore la source d'information à laquelle on fait confiance au Canada. Le public a encore confiance dans les scientifiques, donc ça augmente la pression. I think it's clear that trust needs to remain. I think the scientific feel the need to maintain that trust. But there's a lot of conflict messages. Now we are, in an evolving mode. AI, we talked about the AI. We are talking about the speed of research, speed of having answers for supporting policy decision, regulatory development. But to do the science and to be thorough and to make sure that we're maintaining that integrity, it comes at conflict at times. So I think it's very, very important to recognize that. And I think this is where the Code of Values and Ethics, but also the scientific integrity policy that we have, helps navigate and guide us. And I think it's sometimes, people are thinking, oh, it's easy. But sometimes it's these small nuances in the day-to-day that comes and, makes a conflict or make you think about it. And you're kind of, oh, let's think about that. Let's pause. And just earlier today, I was talking with Melissa, and I was just saying last week, a team who is informing me of an upcoming article going in Nature. I'm so excited. As, the DG, I'm super happy. I'm proud. I'm like, yes, this is awesome. Then I started reading the abstract, and I'm like, oh, this is not exactly the type of news that I was expecting. This is against what I was expecting as a result. But then I was in conflict with myself. I was like, okay, so this means I need to give a heads up to my boss and to my boss. I need to engage media. So this is where I'm like, okay, this is interesting news, and it's just that it's in a flash, in a moment. I'm like, oh, okay. Need to think this one through for 1 second, it's, but at the same time, this is where I'm pleased because I'm like, even if this is not giving the news I was expecting, I know down the road, this means that it's going to be thorough, and it's also that it's going to force more debate and more conversation. And I think this is always where some people are afraid of the debate. And I'm like, no, debate is good. You need debate to have strong policy decision or even to make sure that this paper, this article is thorough. This is why they're calling it peer review. This is, making sure that it can be trusted and be a reference point in the future. But there's a way to do it, right? Debate, thorough conversation is always about in the respectful, in open, transparent way, and this is where it goes a long way. Je pense que vraiment, quand on fait les choses en respectant nos valeurs, l'intégrité scientifique est toujours présente, puis vraiment permet à des gens d'être reconnus internationalement. Nous avons des chercheurs canadiens qui sont sur la scène internationale et vraiment sont reconnus pour leur intégrité et leur façon de faire. Fait que je pense que c'est vraiment important de continuer ces débats-là, ces conversations-là.
Et quelles sont les différences des distinctions entre l'expérience de quelqu'un scientifique au sein du gouvernement par comparaison de quelqu'un dans l'université, par exemple?
Bien, écoutez, c'est vraiment une question intéressante. Puis souvent, on se pose la question, c'est quoi le rôle d'un scientifique au fédéral versus dans les universités? On dit toujours qu'au fédéral, il y a un mandat. Nous avons des priorités. On ne peut pas se mettre à faire de la recherche sur n'importe quoi qui n'a aucun lien avec nos priorités du gouvernement. Je pense que c'est important de le reconnaître. Ceci dit, il faut garder l'indépendance de ces chercheurs-là puis pouvoir avancer. Ceci dit, il y a souvent beaucoup de collaboration avec les universités. Puis même encore, c'est important que ces relations-là respectent aussi les valeurs, puis qu'il n'y a pas d'ingérence, qu'il n'y a pas d'interférence. Fait que c'est important de bien encadrer ça puis reconnaître ça. Les universités jouent un rôle vraiment important au Canada, puis c'est très complémentaire dans tout ce qui est de la recherche, des fois qu'on dit pure ou dure. Tu sais, des fois, eux, ils sont encore beaucoup plus libres d'aller dans toutes les directions que nous au fédéral. Évidemment, au fédéral, on fait de la recherche aussi qui aide la recherche à long terme. On essaie de financer des projets qui ont besoin des plus longues périodes de données. Donc, c'est vraiment des champs complémentaires, mais importants. Donc, I think it's, when it comes to academics versus us in the federal, I think we have different purpose, but we work really hand in hand with a lot of universities in every domain to make sure that we are supporting each other and not overlapping, of course.
Excellent. Aisha, maybe we could turn to you. Your perspectives from more the security community and the sorts of situations you've encountered both in that context and in a line department.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I think, thinking back to when I first started over 20 years ago, I started in counterterrorism intelligence. And so values and ethics has been ingrained in me since day one as a public servant, again, over 20 years ago. But I think the way that I've understood it or connected to it has changed through all of that. And not necessarily because of being in this security environment, but maybe more because of the roles that I've taken and the vantage points that I've had through it. So I was young, fresh out of university, right after 9/11, working in counterterrorism intelligence, as I mentioned, and I'm a Muslim by faith and a Pakistani by heritage. So we were working very intimately in what was called in the West the war on terror. But what it ultimately was a multi-pronged war against Islamic extremism. And if you remember back then, what was being relayed in the media, what was happening in our communities. There was misinformation, there was fear, public attacks, and even people in the community who didn't understand how I could be on the side of a fight against Islamic extremism. I mean, I felt all of that. And so from an early time in my career, I really had to understand my own identity and my own values and what I was doing, and then what my role was as a public servant. But that work was still very operational. So maybe it was easier for me back then to separate the politics and the media and everything else that I was seeing because we were super mission focused. There were bad people doing bad things and we were trying to stop them from doing that. And I was very proud of my work and the people that I worked with. But then you fast forward and I started working in policing. I had left the federal government, started working for the province for a few years. And that was, I would say, my very first real exposure to how government works, because the role that I had before, like I said, was quite operational and mission focused. And so, I didn't need to necessarily think about how government worked at that time. I wasn't writing policy option memos or doing stakeholder engagement for those new policies. I was very focused on a particular national security issue. So when I started working for the province, j'étais déjà l'équivalent d'une directrice et j'ai travaillé sur ces initiatives de sécurité publique qui me semblaient si simples. Do this, people are safer. It's very easy. And we would write these recommendations and I couldn't understand why they weren't just so easily being implemented by the government. Do this, people are safer. I would get really, really frustrated. And I remember it was my ADM who said to me, he actually had the conversation with me and said, Aisha, your job is to give the best advice. You're the expert in this area. Donnez les recommandations, donnez les options de mise en œuvre, mais vous n'êtes pas responsable de la décision. So give your recommendations and the implementation options, but your job is not to make the decision. That's the job of the people that this province elected to be the government. And you uphold democracy in our democratic institutions by playing your role as a public servant and doing it to the best of your ability. But remember your role, right? And Melissa talked about democracy, fearless advice, and things like that. And what is your role as a public servant in this big machine? And then when I became, I worked in the deputy's office as the deputy's chief of staff, and that's where I really saw how complex things actually were. I saw all the things that came to the DM's table. I saw all the things that came to the minister's table, and it wasn't just mine. It wasn't even just our department. It wasn't just our government. et j'ai commencé à mieux comprendre la complexité de la prise de décision et des opérations gouvernementales. So it really helped me put into perspective my role as a public servant, but perhaps even more so, I think it helped me realize that I wish I had understood that sooner when I was in national security operations and when I was in a truly operational environment. I think it's really important for every public servant, no matter what industry, sector, field that you're in, to know that we are public servants. And that's what makes us the same. What does that mean in terms of our values and our ethics and our behaviors? But if I can add one more thing, I would say now in this world, a world with more humanitarian crises, with wars, threats to our democracy, with different perceptions on immigration. I work for IRCC. This is a really fast-changing world, and now as an ADM, I have, again, a different vantage point, and I'm thinking about it differently all over again. C'est parfois difficile. I think the conversation of values and ethics is one that you have to have with yourself regularly, and you have to communicate with others as well. I think Melissa also talked about have those conversations, have that debate. Each of us is in a different role with a different vantage point. We have a different passion or goal or objective, but we have the same values as public servants, and we have to constantly remember, what does that mean in my space?
Those are just terrific points. Look, there's been a lot of wisdom that's been shared over the course of all four of your comments. So I'm very grateful to you. I wonder, we will turn to questions from the audience, but before we do, just interested if very quickly you could each give me something you are most proud of in being a public servant. Let me start with you, Melissa.
Well, the example that I'm going to share will probably get a groan from the audience. I had been part of the Future of Work office at ISED and helping to implement the direction for increased on-site presence. But why I'm proud of that is because we took a lot of effort, concerted effort, to help employees through it. It's a difficult change for people, and it's not one that it's not an easy sell. And the fact is, this is exactly one of those moments where we have to take our personal perspectives and personal preferences and hold them in check and look at the bigger picture. And that is a very, very, very tricky thing to do, but I'm proud of having been there as a support to try to help on the change management side of things, to try to help on the communication side of things, to try to encourage my team members and equip them for that change, and to bring their best to the workplace every day. And they did the same for me, and that's why I love my team. They're just fantastic individuals, and we've fostered this sense of courage within our team and challenging each other and looking at things from different angles. And that became very pertinent for sustaining us through that period of time, because it's tricky when you're potentially at odds with colleagues within your organization in trying to implement something that isn't sexy, isn't a fun thing to work on. It's a hard thing to work on. But I'm very proud of how we came together to support employees through that change, and try to find the best in the situation, all the while bearing in mind that notion of not taking action in our self-interest, but really finding opportunity. And what we did see throughout the pandemic, I think teams actually worked very well virtually and bonded well virtually and had a good sense of direction for themselves within their teams, but people ended up working far more in isolation than in any other point of my 18-year career. And it comes back to that cautionary tale I was mentioning before of, if your sense of identity is strictly tied to your team, you don't realize the bigger picture of what you're engaged in as a public servant, and everything becomes that much harder. And so I'm proud of the work that was done, and I think it's one of those moments where all the values and ethics for each of us working in that team were tested every day. But I hope that for employees in the organization, things were made that much better because we genuinely cared and we genuinely applied the values through that transition.
Fantastic. Natalie.
J'ai été vraiment chanceuse d'avoir pu réaliser des beaux projets, d'avoir fait des belles politiques ou des règlements, des choses au fil des années. Mais dont je suis le plus fière, c'est vraiment d'avoir aidé mes équipes, des employés à continuer, à persévérer, à comprendre comment fonctionne la fonction publique, parce qu'il faut comprendre comment ça fonctionne. Puis surtout de continuer à les aider à les grandir dans la fonction publique. Je pense que c'est ce que je vais me souvenir le plus quand je vais un jour prendre ma retraite. Je pense que c'est vraiment ce qui va me marquer. C'est vraiment d'avoir pu travailler avec des gens d'une compétence puis de qualité exceptionnelle. T'sais, on est vraiment chanceux. Je pense que, Mélissa, tu mentionnais qu'on est reconnu comme étant une fonction publique au monde, comme étant de qualité. Puis je pense que c'est vraiment à cause des personnes puis de la bienveillance des gens. Ça fait que I think it's amazing how people like to help each other through the journey. And I think that's exceptional. So this is what I'm mostly proud to be part of that game.
Nous sommes une communauté. Aisha.
It's going to be such a cheesy answer, Clark, but it's
Cheesy's good.
it's everything I've been able to do, like contributing to keeping people safe and well, Canadians safe and well, in whatever way I can. Like I get to wake up every day and contribute to Canadians in Canada, and my kids, are going to grow up here. They're growing up here. My neighbors, I look at our parks and our communities and our schools, and I want my kids and their kids and my extended family and everybody I know to be able to continue to be well in this country. So it kind of sounds like that whole national security mission and purpose, but really there is such a purpose in public service, and the fact that we are entrusted by Canadians to be able to do that, and it's like my way of kind of giving back as well.
Terrific. Bro.
There's so much to be proud of, but I think the biggest for me so far has been leading the CRA-YPN, the Professional Growth Network that I was talking about. Honestly, I like to say I've worked with the smartest people in the public service through that network, being able to serve them, being able to help them find their voice, and contributing to our agency's development and continued growth through the different events that we did, through the different consultations we did, looking at corporate policy documents, looking at HR procedures and whatnot, and providing and sharing our voice and our opinions as public servants, young public servants, and to be able to see that take effect and eventually impact everybody else across the agency is something that is very powerful for me, and I'm very proud of that work that we've done.
Madame.
Thank you, everyone, to all our panelists. And now we'll move on to the Q&A. So just a reminder, wooclap.com, VEOCT, to submit your questions, and we'll do our best to alternate between our virtual participants and those here in the room. Just for those here in the room, we're going to try and get as many questions as possible from everyone, but for those of you who are here in the room, limit to one question. Don't try and get sneaky. I'm not going to let that happen. And use it as an opportunity to practice your concise briefing skills. I will also ask my panel members here to indicate to me if they wish to take a question in particular. Not all of you are required to answer all of the questions, and that way we'll try to get to as many as possible. So I'm going to start with one that's come in virtually, and it reads, sometimes it can be hard to respond to higher official demands and uphold nonpartisanship, public interest, and also protecting the crown. How do you balance all these things? Who would like to? Yes.
So, look, I think I contest slightly the framing of the question, because I think oftentimes if we are responding to demands, that is part of the function of a public service. We are here to be providing support for the elected officials who are often the sources of the sorts of demands that we are responding to. And so I think on the one hand, that sort of level of service is something that we should be mindful of, and that's an opportunity for us to be excellent in the work that we do. I think as we're doing that, we need to be very, very careful about the kinds of functions that we play. The nonpartisanship is inherent in the role we play. Our credibility is based on the fact that we are not partisan. And I should say, it's not that there's anything wrong with being partisan. I think our electoral system is premised on people feeling strongly about events, participating in the electoral process, bringing vigor to our public debates. That's all incredibly important. But we have a very specific role within that, and that is different from the broad public. And our role is to make sure that we, A, are providing the best information, the best support we can to people who have been elected by our fellow citizens. And the second is to make sure that we are doing that in a way that provides confidence that we're not just being driven by whatever the issues of the day are, but we are actually basing our advice on the best expertise we can, the best information we can, and in many instances, the sort of experiences that we have over the course of time. And I think it's really important to then situate that. We're also not the only voice providing advice to governments, and we shouldn't pretend that we are. There's all sorts of information that exists in our society. Anyone who is elected is going to be drawing off of that information, as they should. But what we have, which is unique, is we have a right to be heard. We participate in a process where we can provide advice to the duly elected government. We are here to do that. And that is an extraordinarily important thing. And it's something that we should be deeply proud of, and we should take extremely seriously. And that's a slightly separate question than if we are facing competing demands on our time. And that is a sort of something that obviously is a reality in most workplaces, where you have a bunch of different demands that you need to figure out. And then that becomes an issue of prioritization and how you best kind of decide what's most important together with leadership and with the people who are posing the questions in the first place. And that's kind of a collective responsibility. But I think that issue of a nonpartisan source of information is a huge strength of our system. And if you look at, like, there's just been a Nobel Prize that was awarded to economists looking at the importance of institutions in successful societies. We shouldn't lose track of that. It really, really matters. And as I say, part of our legitimacy in that broader system is the fact that we don't come at this from a partisan perspective. We come at it from a public service perspective, and that's distinct.
Maybe if I can just add just one small thing. Sometimes people are concerned that they will not say what people want to hear. But sometimes over the years, I realized that by saying the right things, you even gain more respect from people, because sometimes they don't want to hear what you think they want to hear. So saying, just providing fearless advice, this is the answer, but then after loyal implementation, of course. But, sometimes people respect that also. So
it's such an important point. And I mean, I think it goes to that question of courage. And that's on us as leaders to, as well, create an atmosphere where people can actually have a discussion. Because if we're all just sort of going into a conversation knowing that we're all going to agree at the end of it, then there's not much point in having the conversation. And, we are, I use this phrase somewhere else, we're kind of aggregators of wisdom. Like, we are all coming at this from a whole bunch of different perspectives. And the strength of our system is ultimately, because we can have robust exchanges, you can come to better advice.
Oh, yes.
And that collectively is our responsibility. But we have to give ourselves and give our system permission for that to happen in order for us to get that result.
Merci beaucoup. So I don't know where you are, but there is someone in this room with a question, so I'll ask you. Perfect. Thank you. And please feel free to introduce yourself. Et juste un rappel que vous pouvez également poser votre question dans la langue de votre choix. Allez-y.
Merci. Thank you very much, and this is for all of you. I'm from the Public Health Agency of Canada, and as a brand new public servant, there was a recent change in government, and the area that I worked with tended to have a lot to do with social determinants of health, and the new minister was reported to have said, "Don't talk to me about social determinants of health," which is odd, but a bit of an issue when you're working in public health and you want to loyally implement the policies of the government of the day. But that government of the day thing is, I think, important when we start talking about democracy and the value of democracy, because we have to recognize we are a first past the post system. And so when I think about the value of democracy, I think about, yes, they're the people who are giving us guidance at the moment, but there's all the other people who didn't vote for us, who are also Canadians that we're supposed to serve, and the people who, for a variety of different reasons, either don't feel that they're represented in the government, don't bother voting, or are otherwise excluded and deserving of equity that they're not getting due to inherent biases and other things. And the reason why I bring up that particular minister in that particular situation is not my area, but one of our fellow groups was working in tuberculosis. And the situation with tuberculosis in the North is one where social determinants of health is huge. Well, there was an election very shortly thereafter. There was a new minister, Leona Glukak, who came from the North. One of the first things she reportedly did when she ended up in the Minister of Health chair was say, what the heck are you guys doing about tuberculosis in the North? Fortunately, my colleagues, while not necessarily raising things above the radar, not necessarily saying a heck of a lot because they knew they weren't going to get the traction from the previous minister, were able to say, here's what we've been working on for the last couple of years. Here's the work that we're doing to help support TB in the North. So I think that that's one of the things that we as public servants always have to consider is, yes, we have to loyally implement the policies of the government of the day, but that's today's government. And we are here to serve all Canadians at all times. So there does need to be ways of balancing the work that will serve everybody that still has to go on in the background. And so that's what I'm kind of looking to you as the clerk and others. How do we do that balance?
So that's a great question. And it goes to some pretty fundamental points around accountabilities and responsibilities. And I guess I'd take a couple stabs at it, and I'd be very interested in hearing my colleagues as well. I think on the one hand, as a deputy minister, I always felt that it was my responsibility to say to my ministers what I understood to be the major problems that we needed to be addressing, and to make suggestions as to, you know, what kinds of options that were available in order for us to address challenges that were rising. And part of that was to try and draw off of some degree of kind of forecasting as to where you could see problems coming as well. And I felt that was an important role that I have. And the extension then is the department has an accountability to me to be engaging in some degree of foresight and some analysis around the situations that we confront. And that's irrespective of mandate. That's just, I think, the nature of what part of what departments should be doing. At the same time, the way our accountabilities work, I am accountable to a minister. The minister is accountable to Parliament and to the Prime Minister and to the legislature. And that legitimacy is then, that is the expression of our democracy. And this is the, that's the strength of our system, is we have that participation that will determine broad direction of our country and our government, and it flows through that series of authorities. And it is entirely within the mandate of an elected government to determine what the priorities should be and how we should be spending our resources. And that then is the faithful implementation piece. But I think and maybe to go back to an earlier point, there are no bright lines here. This is the nature of a values conversation, is there are no bright lines. The thing that I have found really gratifying about what I've participated in over the course of the last year is, I don't think anyone, if it's simple, then you're not having the right conversation. And what's been gratifying has been to see that we frame our conversations more now with respect to our core values, whether this is a respect for democracy, whether it's respect for people, stewardship, integrity, and excellence. And that should be the rubric under which we are having these conversations, recognizing that there probably are going to be differences of views, and there's not going to be bright lines. But I do think what's critically important is that recognition that A, we have a responsibility to be giving our best advice and to be describing the world as we see it, but to respect that there is a democratic process that's resulted in a set of strategic decisions that have been made, and those strategic decisions are going to have resource consequences, and they're going to have other consequences that we have to respect, because that's the nature of our system. And so but I'd be very grateful for any other thoughts that
Maybe
others
I'll
may have.
invite Aisha. I saw you nodding quite a bit, so please go ahead.
I was agreeing with what the clerk was saying. But sure, I think,
You don't have
it
to.
is, it is a challenging one. And I think I had this conversation with my team last week, and it's really, our advice as a public service isn't going to change. If it's fair and objective advice, the advice is the advice. It might be the way that we message it, how we incorporate it in our advice, whether it's implemented now or later, fast or slow, or the language we use, etc. Like when I hear the minister or the minister's staff say that they don't want to hear about something, usually it's because they don't feel that they're being heard on what they want to actually achieve either, or we didn't explain ourselves enough. And so I actually find that challenge really interesting, where it's like, how do we meet these policy objectives while doing all the things? So in the immigration space, it's how do we meet these policy objectives that the government has set out while keeping Canadians safe and reducing the abuse in our systems, improving client service, etc. So sometimes it's a matter of messaging it a little bit differently, but really showing the government of the day, okay, I understand you want to achieve these objectives. Here are all the different things we need to consider, and we're going to help you do that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes I will say I hear, or I'll have conversations with the teams, because we'll look at the advice that we're providing and we're like, okay, is this truly objective? Is it? Or do we already in our own heads think that it's a bad idea, and we've written it kind of that way as well? And so we go back and we're like, okay, how can we make this objective and be really clear? So there's an art to it. And like I said, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But at the end of the day, if you are putting that best advice forward in a way that understands what the government is trying to achieve, then you can get to a further part in that conversation.
Thank you so much for that. All right, a question that many will relate to, coming in virtually. With tightening budgets, how can the public service make sure that public servants don't take unethical shortcuts in an effort to uphold high expectations and demands? And if I may, I might direct this one first to Melissa in your role as a manager. How would you answer this question?
I think part of it is in how we frame our thinking of productivity. And I think Treasury Board, TBS may be looking into this very shortly, but that notion of there's a lot of emphasis on productivity as being the output, and is the output generated on time and within budget. But there needs to be an equal attention focus to the how we are producing part of the conversation, because it really does take both. We could just be churning out things on time and churning a lot of it out, but if we're not invested in applying good, proper practices in the development, then what we're producing isn't necessarily meeting the need. It's not necessarily where it's worthwhile putting our effort. And so at a team level, at a manager level, again, it comes back to a lot of those same conversations of create space for brainstorm, create space for diversity of views, create space for different voices. And Ian Stedman, in his opening remarks, had made the question around data and questioning like whose voices are represented in this data, and had also made the comment about it's important to ask questions. And while his example was people outside of the public service asking questions of decisions that are being made, though for the same reasons that is important in building trust, we need to have that as part of our day-to-day way of working within our teams. And while you may think I'm straying from the question a bit, the notion is if you invest in good quality development, you may have to sacrifice the amount you're producing at the end of the day, but the impact, the outcome, not just the output, but the outcome of what you're actually delivering to the people in Canada could be far more meaningful. And so it does require a rethinking, a redefinition of this concept of productivity to shift the focus so intensely away from units of production and cogs in machines And by doing that, again, this comes back to the values and ethics, because excellence is about innovation. You can't innovate if you don't take the time in the process to really focus on how you are producing and not just how much and what you are producing.
Thank you very much. And if I may, Raoul, en tant que fonctionnaire un petit peu plus récent, je serais curieuse par rapport à ta perspective sur cette question-là.
Yeah, je pense la seule chose que j'aimerais ajouter, c'est peut-être ajouter à ce que ma collègue vient de dire, c'est a lot of departments go through a bunch of exercises to figure out what projects should we keep funding, what should we let go for now, just to kind of adjust to this new reality that we're in. I think it's important that we look at the opportunity cost also. So, for example, you have a project you want to put forward, but there's not enough budget for it. How will this affect Canadians at the end of the day if we don't put this forward? You know, so I think that's also something that's important. Je sais qu'il y a beaucoup de directions qui viennent de en haut, d'en bas, de partout, mais c'est important aussi de voir c'est quoi la conséquence. Comment ça va affecter la population? Est-ce que c'est important de retourner et demander plus d'argent parfois? Ça arrive, c'est ce que le travail d'un gestionnaire il comprend. Donc, je pense que c'est quelque chose à ajouter. That we have to look at every single thing and look at the impact that it provides to Canadians, and also see how can we make sure that they can continue benefiting from these programs that we're putting forward. And if there's no budget, what can we do also? Money is not always the solution sometimes. There are other ways that we could do things. For example, at the CRA, we've realized that by involving younger public servants, giving them micro projects, they're so thrilled to contribute and to provide their voice that projects continue to happen despite the budget not being available. But there are people who are really committed and they really want to put their voices forward. They want to put their energy towards something that they care about. And I guess that's my message. Il faut regarder qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire s'il n'y a pas d'argent. S'il n'y a pas d'argent, est-ce qu'on peut demander un peu plus d'argent? Donc, je vais m'arrêter ici. But
Merci beaucoup.
I guess that would be my point of view.
Great. Merci beaucoup, Raoul. Une autre question qui provient de l'espace virtuel. How can we make employers and leaders accountable in making decisions based on the public service values and in modeling these values?
I think that may be for me. So look, I think there are a number of answers to that. The first one is we have conversations like this. We set our expectations for ourselves, for our community. We remind ourselves of what our standards are. As I said in my comments, we are the public service right now. There's no one else. It's us. And we collectively have accountability for this organization. I have particular accountability from where I sit, but this is on all of us to kind of make sure that we are being guided by the values that define us. And there's particularly a role for leadership in that regard. And there's a technical answer to this question as well. One of my roles is I chair a group of senior officials who do all of the assessment. I'm looking at my friend Donaldin McClement, who's the secretary to this group. We do the assessment of all of the deputy ministers. And I can tell you that one of the central conversations we have for each deputy minister is not just what was accomplished over the course of the year, but how was it done? And that is a significant part about how people have been treated. It's a significant part about how the values have been reflected in other ways. Have we actually seen sound stewardship? Have we seen integrity in the way that people have carried out their jobs? Those are all kind of fundamental questions that we should be asking of each leader. And that should then be reflected in the review of PMAs at each departmental level. And when I was in the department, I can assure you that that was a central piece of what we were talking about. Another piece of this, and this is one of the outcomes of the process that we've just had, is I've asked all of the departments now to follow a practice that was started at Global Affairs of having kind of aggregated accountability reports so that people can see that there's actually been actions taken, because there are constraints as to how we do these kinds of practices. We do need to be respectful of people's privacy. But at the aggregate, we can show that there is actually action taken with respect to breaches of the conduct that we have prescribed. And so I think all of those things are super important, but I circle back to the key piece. This is about our culture. And it really is about all of us seeing ourselves as the embodiment of the institution we have carriage of right now. And as I say, it absolutely is a question of leadership, but it's not only a question of leadership.
Thank you. Looking at the time, we have time for, oh, we've got someone in the room. Go ahead, we'll alternate.
Okay, hello. Good morning, clerk. John, it's nice to see you. Thank you so much. Laurie Sargent from the Department of Justice. And I must admit, have a bit of a legally informed, shall we say, question to put to you all. But it's one that I, coming from a practice of human rights and Indigenous rights, take very seriously. And that is that, if we look at our code, it does speak to the fact that these values are rooted in our Constitution. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to, and what I really like about this conversation is the real talk that we're having about those challenging situations, about when direction coming down from the highest levels does not appear consistent with the Constitution. How do we work through that? And this does come from real experience, but it's also drawn from the conversations we've been having about equity, diversity, and inclusion, reconciliation, et cetera, which are very much constitutionally grounded rights and principles. So I wanted to launch that easy one out into the ether for some reflection. Thank you.
And we have about 2 minutes. I'll start, unless others wish to chime in. Look, I think there's obviously a specific role for justice with respect to the Charter, which is prescribed, and that's a kind of critical role to make sure that we're mindful of Charter obligations. And I think I was a legal advisor at one point. I think we have, from the legal perspective, a responsibility to be as clear as possible as to where we see legal risks and the sort of management of those kinds of risks in the context of policy development. And that all, to me, goes to having a very early engagement with the lawyers and making sure that we are mindful of the kinds of considerations that should go into policy development. And at the end of the day, we operate within, the faithful implementation is not limitless in the sense that we need to be guided by what our legal requirements are, and we need to be guided by the constraints that we may have. And those are important things. And I just want to pick up, because it's been a theme that came up through each stage of this conversation. And it's not quite your question, Laurie, but I'm going to change the topic. The point is the intersection between our personal views and our institutional role. That came up in the conversation that Catherine Blewett led. It's been evident in each conversation that I have had. It's been present over the course of the sessions we've been having in the last 2 days. And it's front and center in the questions around social media. And I think it does get to the point I was raising earlier, that it's a good thing to have strong views. It's a good thing to have a sense of your own limitations and your own perspectives. Those are all features of us as individuals. But we do have an institutional role here, which is constraining, and that's just true. And we have responsibilities that because we embody this institution, our actions reflect on the institution. And there may be instances where you come to a point where your own values don't coincide with what that institutional role is. And that's okay too, that in the sense that there are all sorts of ways of contributing to the well-being of our society. But if we're in the public service, we are constrained to being nonpartisan. We have to be mindful of the fact that our actions reflect on the institution as a whole. And we have to reflect on the fact that the legitimacy of our system turns on duly elected governments. And that's just the way that the system works, and it's important that that's the way the system works. And so I see that as a feature, not a bug. But the point is that there's an intersection between what our personal views will be and those institutional views. And sometimes there will be tension. And sometimes that's a cause for personal reflection. But it is really, really important that we always be mindful, as we are public servants, in the role that we play in support of our democracy and in a reflection of those democratic values.
It's not directly a response to that question, but I just want to point out, look what's happening here. We have very challenging questions being asked to the clerk, directly to the clerk, and no one is being let out of the room. No one's mic is being turned off. Like, that is a reflection of the public service we're in. And this is an example of the values and ethics in practice, in work, and something we can have faith in and something we can have pride in.
Amazing. So we've come to time, and I'd like to thank our panelists, Raoul, Aïcha, Nathalie, Mélissa et bien sûr Monsieur le greffier. Donc, encore une fois, si on peut les remercier d'avoir passé ce temps-là avec nous. And just a few final comments before we take a quick break. If you haven't visited it yet, we have a virtual kiosk where you can find a lot of resources that will either support or complement a lot of the topics and conversations that we'll be having, so don't miss out on that. It also includes an onboarding video, actually, from the clerk that introduces new public servants to the unique responsibilities and privileges that we all have in serving Canadians. So I encourage you to check that out. A reminder that the Speaker's Corner is available here out there in the hall in Ottawa et que l'équipe des médias sociaux du Bureau du Conseil privé sont ici sur place pour interviewer ceux et celles qui le veulent sur les sujets justement liés au symposium. Et ces entrevues seraient diffusées sur les comptes de médias sociaux du Bureau du Conseil privé. So be sure to check out, we've received a lot of photos, I understand, so be sure to check out our photo wall as well. But we are now going to take a break. We will see you back here promptly at 1:30 Eastern Standard Time, de retour à l'heure à 13h30, heure normale de l'Est. Merci tout le monde.